and welcome back to By Myself But Not Alone. This is episode 33, Louisville, Kentucky. And if you've been following the series, you're fully aware that I've been missing in action again. I have to apologize for that. I've been putting in more hours of overtime than anyone should possibly think of working. And I've been doing that to pay for the last 4 months of 2021. Had a whole lot of Metallica shows going on. I'm sure many of you know what that's like. There just aren't enough hours in the day. As I like to say, life happens, and that's exactly what happened. But we're back now. 3 episodes left in this series. Is one for the history books, so let's get on with it. At the end of the last episode, we were up, checked out of our hotel, and on the road a little earlier than usual. The plan was to stop off in Mascoutah, which was about halfway to Louisville from Kansas City. The entire trip was about 500 miles, and we should have been able to make it in under 8 hours, but that's not exactly what happened, thanks to a couple unexpected delays. The first one came in the form of Red Rack's thrift store. Michelle had never heard of it, but when I told her it was just like Goodwill with a different name, she was all about it, so we had to go. And I wasn't going to argue. I was as excited as she was. The problem was we got there too early. So after waiting 25 minutes for them to open the doors, and then our little 30-minute quick shop run through, we had to make sure we laid eyes on all the wares they had to offer. We had added an hour to the trip. We each found a couple treasures, as we always do. We were both happy, but we realized that we really needed to make up some time. As soon as we hit I-70, the old trusty co-pilot did her thing. She whipped out her phone, pulled up the map, checked it. It looked like it was going to be a straight shot to St. Louis. It didn't look like there were going to be any traffic delays or anything like that. Hammer down. I laughed and I told her I wasn't going to go any more than 5 miles an hour over the speed limit for the entire trip, because every time I've ever been to Kansas City, the state troopers sitting along the highway at regular intervals, once you hit a certain point on that I-70 trip, are part of the scenery every single time. I promised her they'd be everywhere. I wasn't looking directly at her, but I could see out of the corner of my eyes she's just shaking her head, and I already knew what she was thinking. We had been together for quite some time at this point, and I kind of got used to her endless ridicule of my driving. And like clockwork, as I expected, the next thing out of her mouth was that I was the most paranoid driver she had ever met. Just then, as she was saying that, we passed one who jumped right out behind me and pulled me over. That sure shut her up quickly, and I had to laugh, but I was just curious as to why I'd gotten pulled over. And I knew I was about to find out, but I knew I wasn't speeding. It just didn't make any sense to me. And when the officer got up to the car, he explained to me that I was following the semi that I was behind a little too closely. I was 3 car lengths rather than the 5 that, as it states in the driver's ed manual, and that's why he had pulled me over. You may remember that was the exact reason Officer Trevor in Arizona used to pull me over, and with Michelle as my witness, I was nowhere near close enough for that to have been a legitimate reason to be pulled over. So I just assumed he was going to pull me over for whatever, and that's what he chose. He told me to bring my driver's license and my registration and head back to his cruiser with him. When I got there, I hopped in, I handed it to him. He had to do a little bit more of an extensive search because I was in a rental car, that's what he said. So he got busy doing his thing, and I got busy doing my thing. I just started yapping. I don't know why I do it, but my whole life I've done this. I started answering questions that aren't even asked. So I looked at him and I said, man, I thought you were pulling me over because I'm in a car with West Virginia plates, and I'm coming back from Kansas City, heading to St. Louis. And, I'm just thinking something crazy off the wall, like you're thinking this guy must be picking up cheap meth in West Virginia and trading it for the cheap OxyContin in St. Louis, not that I know anything about any of this stuff, and delivering it to Kansas City. He just kind of looked at me and he chuckled. He kind of laughed and said, man, no, I pulled you over because you were too close. He kind of acted a lot like Officer Trevor did in Arizona. And I told him if I was coming across as slightly delirious, it was because of all the traveling I'd been doing with my Metallica black ticket. Because I can only imagine what that must look like to a guy like that in that situation. As soon as he had heard that, he asked me if I was at the show the previous day in Kansas City. And I said, of course, that's what I'm doing here. And now we're heading to Louisville. But we got to go through St. Louis because I live right outside of St. Louis. Got to swing by and pick up my suit for the black ticket, black tie event. I said, you really don't have time for me to get into all that, but we've been doing a lot of traveling. He was polite the whole time, but at that point it really transitioned into just a conversation, kind of like what had happened with Officer Trevor. He said, man, I've got so many friends who were at that show, and I really wanted to be there myself. I'm a big fan, but I just couldn't make my work schedule work out. I assured him that he missed a great show. I told him I'll spare you the details, and I'll let your friends share that with you. But I waited until he gave me back my license, my registration, and my warning ticket before I pulled out my pocket full of Kansas City pics. I didn't want it to look like I was attempting to bribe him or anything. You know the story from last time. Same thing applied here. I asked if there was any department policy or anything that would prevent him from accepting a gift, especially when he was only issuing a warning and not a ticket. He laughed. He said, no, I'm allowed to have one. There's nothing that stops that. And I'd really love to have one if you have an extra. And I, held my hand. I had a couple there. I said, no problem, man. You're from here. That's who really deserves these picks. And I handed him one. I gave him the 2-minute rundown about my YouTube channel, and I said when I get to the Kansas City episode, I'd give him a big shout out if he was, allowed to give me his name. If I was allowed to use his name, he said, yeah, man, give me a shout out. His name's Officer Bo. Officer Bo, shout out, brother. It was nice to meet you. He smiled and wished us a safe trip as I got out of his car and headed back to ours. On the way back up to the car, I could already see Michelle shaking her head, and when I got in, I knew it was coming. She let me have it. She said, don't you realize that in situations like this, it's best to just sit there quietly and answer specific questions as they're asked. Otherwise, don't say a damn word. But I was watching you in the rearview mirror, and it looked like you two were old buddies. Do you ever shut the hell up? No, I already know the answer. No, you don't. And I can't figure that out. It makes me crazy. I just laughed at her, and I said, well, at least I didn't get a ticket. He's a big Metallica fan. I gave him a guitar pick. Kind of made it sound like I had a good little visit. All she could do was shake her head. With that, we got back on the road, heading for St. Louis. I said, we're not stopping again. But less than 30 minutes later, we were forced to stop again. We got pulled over again. Neither of us could believe it. This time it was a lady officer. As she walked up to the car, she told me that she pulled me over because I didn't use my blinker when I went around the truck. I just looked at her, didn't know. I said, well, I really don't know what to say. I just got pulled over a half hour back. So it's like, I'm starting to suspect that maybe you really think I'm running drugs or something. But this may not be a legitimate excuse in the eyes of the law, but the reason I didn't use a blinker when I went around the truck was because as far as we could see either way, there's not another vehicle around us. So there wouldn't have been anybody back there to see the blinker if I had used it. I wasn't trying to sound like a smartass, and I was kind of worried that might be how she perceived it. She asked me to grab my license and registration. Come on back to her cruiser. I knew the routine by this point. When we got in her car, I finished what I started before I got out of mine. I said, it just really seems odd to me that I've been pulled over twice now, 30 minutes apart. And I gave her a little bit more of that. I said, if you need to search the car, we can tear this sucker down. We don't have anything illegal. It's just odd. She kind of agreed that would seem odd, so I started to think, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. And she asked me the other officer's name. I said his name was Officer Bo. I didn't catch his last name, and I don't know if that's his real name or a nickname, but anyway, she handed me my license back. She told me she was going to give me a verbal warning about the blinker. I asked her if she was a Metallica fan. She said, well, they've got a couple good songs, but, she seemed far less excited than the last guy. I asked her if she wanted a pick. She said, no thanks, I appreciate that, but that pick will probably make another fan much more excited than it's going to make me. And I appreciated her honesty, but I really wanted to give her a pick because I knew it was going to make Michelle crazy that my interactions with these cops was putting us further behind schedule. So as I went to open the door, I dropped the pick right next to the door before I opened it. I knew that either the trooper would find it later or perhaps another person who gets pulled over down the line and has to go back and visit with her in her car. Maybe they'd find it. Either way, it was going to end up in the hands of someone from near Kansas City. When I told Michelle that I got another warning and that I gave another guitar pick away, she jumped right on Facebook and she started making a post about how I'm trading picks to get out of tickets. And that's not exactly how it went. Look, it's kind of close, but I didn't want to spoil her fun. I had every intention of telling her exactly how the second pick, the dropping, went, but I don't believe I ever did that. So, Michelle, I want to say now you know. So after all the action with the troopers, we were another hour behind, but 3 hours later, we were passing the St. Louis Arch on our left, crossing the Poplar Street Bridge. 30 minutes later, we were in Mascoutah. We could have shortened our overall trip and just kept on rolling past the Mascoutah exit sign, except for one reason. We had to stop and pick up that damn suit that I had to buy for the black ticket, black tie event that I haven't been talking a heck of a lot about. My mom had to make a few little alterations to satisfy her own eye. I don't know the first thing about a damn suit. Don't want to know, but I trust her on it. But she wanted to take it in here or there or whatever you do to make a suit look right. In other words, Michelle got to meet my mom. At that point, I think I had about 6 episodes complete from this series up on the channel. My mom loved to watch them. She'd watch them over and over. She still loves them even more so now. She'd been telling me more and more with each episode how much she really loved the Metallica People, and she was super excited that she was actually going to meet the one that I had been rolling around the countryside with. Well, they hit it off instantly like I kind of figured they would. Michelle worked for the Girl Scouts for a long time in Wisconsin, as my mother had done in South Carolina many years ago. They spent a good amount of time talking about the Girl Scouts, and then the conversation slowly transitioned into what an insanely unorganized mess of chaos my mother had raised in her middle child. They had a high old time at my expense. So the visit went well, and pretty soon we were back on the road, and in just a few hours we were checking into our hotel in Louisville. That suit gave me something to talk about, and that's what made the time pass so quickly. I had intentionally blocked out thinking about that suit all along, but now that it was in my possession, it was becoming real. I wasn't thrilled at all about having committed to wear that thing. At this point, the regret of that was really kind of starting to set in, and I wasn't certain that I wouldn't chicken out before it was all over. But enough about that for now. We'll get to that in the final episode. The next morning we slept in. I think at this point on the tour we could have slept all day, and it would not have saved us from the exhaustion that we were both feeling at this point on the tour. We went ahead and got up, got some wash done, as had become the standard procedure on the little 3-day break after the 4th show of each leg. We headed out to get some supplies. I needed to get my postcards. I dropped Michelle off at the grocery store. I hit a truck stop. When I picked her up, she pointed out that there was a Goodwill right next door. I probably would have seen it even if she hadn't pointed it out, so we hit that. We wasted a little time there. Once we were all loaded up, we got ready and headed down to the pre-party. I'm really not sure who lined it up, but they found a really cool place. It's called the Troll Pub Under the Bridge. It's right next to the KFC Yum Center. It's a pretty unique place. There's a big statue of a troll right out front, thus the name of the bar. But he was out there, and everybody that was going by was stopping and getting pictures taken. So I have a feeling it's a pretty well-known establishment. And the bar itself was underground. It was kind of like a dungeon. There was a good group of Metfam there. It was a really cool place. We ate. The food was great. All the alcohol anybody could consume. We hung out for a few hours, but then we had to leave early to pick up our friend Svet at the airport. He had reserved rooms in the same hotels as us, and he was going to be riding with us for the final 3 shows on the tour. The next morning we got up, got ready. It was show day, but there was only one thing wrong with the picture, and that was the forecast. By the time we made it down to the arena, it looked like it had been raining for hours, and it didn't look like it was going to let up anytime soon. Michelle and Svet weren't going to let a little rain put them any further back in the line than they needed to be. I, on the other hand, have never really cared too much about line placement, so I told them I'd be up when Mother Nature wanted to be a little more cooperative. So I sat there in the car in the parking garage across from the arena, got out my phone, played around with it for a little bit, tried to get the extended forecast for the day, and I got bored pretty quickly, jumped out of the car, and I stood in the entrance of the doorway, and I was looking out over the Ohio River and the arena itself. Looked down the street, and you could see where the bridge came down and came back down to regular ground level. But it was a really nice, relaxing, half hour, 45 minutes that I just stood there. I really could have stood there all day, but the rain let up just a little bit, so I decided to make my move, and I headed up to the building. It wasn't a bad walk at all because I was covered from the rain by the bridge overhead, and by the time I got up to where the bridge came back down to street level, right next to the arena, there was a stairway that went up to where the lines were forming in front of the arena, but by that point it started raining pretty heavily again, so I just joined the large group of people that were standing under there trying not to get wet. I talked to a lot of cool people there, but I just couldn't make myself pull my camera out and get busy trying to grab interviews, throw my questions at people. So I just decided I would go ahead and enjoy the conversation without the camera. I was just completely exhausted, probably more exhausted at this point on the trip than throughout the whole tour. That includes the Cincinnati and Cleveland shows with the weather and my ear problem. I wasn't altogether certain at this point that I was going to make it. In the eyes of some, there were only 3 shows left, but those 3 shows were going to take everything I had to get to the end of the road. So I just stood there and spent the next hour hanging out with some very cool people, as I already said. The rain eventually started to let up, and I decided to make a break for it. I headed up the stairs and out to the front of the arena where the black ticket line was forming. I saw all kinds of people that I know. I talked to quite a few people that I didn't know. I met 3 young guys from St. Louis. They were standing right behind me in line. I enjoyed talking to them. I always get a little excited when I meet people from the St. Louis area. I got to give out a couple more of our black ticket patches, but I still couldn't find the strength to pull the camera out. I decided it was just going to be a day where there were no interviews. This is the only episode from the whole tour where there are no interviews because I just couldn't make myself do it. I was just too exhausted. So in between my spoken part here and the video at the end, you get a little break this time. Although those interviews to me are the funnest part of this whole project. I took a walk along the line that was formed against the building. The rain really didn't seem to have any effect on anyone or their excitement. It seemed like a typical show day for everyone, but I was just so exhausted, and I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but it was getting that bad. The only thing I could hope was when I got down on the floor, Jim and Joe came on, it would kind of wake me up, as had kind of been happening in the past couple shows. And if nothing else, certainly when Metallica took the stage, I'd feel that energy. I took a walk along the line to say hey to as many people as I could, and pretty soon they were letting us in. We stood in another line for a little while, and pretty soon they were taking us around and down to the arena floor. And I remember walking down, as I just got the feeling, this is a pretty big place. I mean, we've been in a lot of big places by this point, but it didn't necessarily seem larger, but it just seemed like there were so many more empty seats staring. You know, I could only imagine what the crowd was going to be like once everyone got in. The KFC Yum Center is the home of the Louisville Cardinals, and I'm pretty certain it's a pretty wild place to see a college basketball game, and I soon found out that it's a pretty wild place to see a concert. When we made it to the floor, I headed over to the soundboard. That was pretty much the congregation spot for all those who were deciding not to rail up from show to show to show. Went over, said, hey, said I can't avoid this all night. I need a little footage for the video. Got my camera out and decided to do my walk around the rail. On that little trip, I saw my friend Dustin Stroll, and when I saw him, I remembered he was with his road dog Brandon, and I remembered that Louisville was scheduled to be his 50th show. And I had a flashback in that moment of the morning that Dustin and I first got our black ticket. Each of us set out with a goal of hitting our 50th Metallica shows. We were both at like 44, 45, and I didn't really stop. I felt like I should have. I just kind of kept walking along, but I glanced back at him. I gave him a nod that acknowledged that I was fully aware that he had made it to the goal he had set forth at the beginning of the tour, and he gave me a nod back that said, "You made it too, brother." I'm going to save the rest of it because we're going to get into that at the Grand Rapids episode. But again, Dustin, congrats on the old Louisville. Jim and Joe came out and they did their thing with the same level of success as we had gotten used to, with them getting the crowd fired up for the show. Pretty soon Metallica was on the stage doing the same thing. It had been almost 15 years since Metallica had played Louisville, and as it turned out, that show was the largest attendance of the entire 2018-2019 North American leg of Metallica's WorldWired tour. The exact number in attendance varies from article to article, somewhere around 23,000. I think Wiki has it listed at 21,650, something like that. Whatever the number, I know there were a lot of people there. We had a solid set list that night with 4 key rotations, and the crowd in Louisville embraced the evening as much as any other crowd along the entire tour. When pick time rolled around, I'm not quite sure how I pulled it off, but I got my 2 picks, one for Alexander, one for Jonathan, and I got an extra one. But honestly, that night, it was pretty much a blur for me due to nothing other than my own exhaustion, but it was the crowd, the energy in that crowd that kept me there. And I say thanks, guys. Otherwise, I might have tapped out of this one early in the night, and then it would have been over. I'm not sure if we found the picture or not. Michelle and Svet probably went off and found the group picture. I might even be in that picture. I kind of lost track of all of that. And if I kind of seem like a question mark, I kind of feel like that, when I look back on the Louisville show. And again, it had nothing to do with the crowd. That's what kept me there. So in the end, I was happy to have made it to another show. We got back to the hotel, 2 shows to go. We crashed, we got up early, we got juiced on coffee, and we hit the road to Indianapolis. Again, I'd like to say congrats to Dustin Stroll for hitting a personal milestone at the Louisville show. Good job, old boy. I'd like to say thanks to the crowd in Louisville. After seeing the excitement at a Metallica show, I can only imagine what it would be like to see a Louisville Cardinals game there. You guys really know how to host a party and do it right. And as always, I'd like to thank you for watching. If you like what we have going on here, I'd appreciate it greatly if you consider subscribing to the channel. Give us a like, a dislike, whatever the case may be. Leave us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. Next stop, Indianapolis, Indiana. We'll see you there. Until then, rock on.